The sun hung low in the sky, painting the dusty town with streaks of gold and orange. Wooden buildings cast long shadows over the streets, and the faint sound of a horse's hooves echoed in the quiet afternoon. For most townsfolk, it was just another ordinary day. Children ran in and out of the general store, laughing as they chased each other, while the adults carried baskets of goods or mended fences. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery and warm hay from the stables. Life seemed calm, simple, and predictable. At the heart of the town, the general store stood as a hub of activity. The doors creaked as townspeople came in and out, buying flour, sugar, nails, or small trinkets for their homes. Behind the counter stood Lila Hart, a woman of 28 with strong features and sharp eyes that always seemed to notice everything around her. She moved with purpose, arranging jars of jam and counting coins with steady hands. She knew almost everyone in town, and they all knew her as someone who could handle herself in difficult situations. Her store was more than just a place to buy goods. It was a safe spot where people could share news, gossip, and sometimes their worries. Lila was wiping down the counter when she noticed a group of men huddled near the edge of the street. Their shadows stretched long in the late afternoon sun, and their whispers floated toward her. She leaned slightly forward, trying to hear. One of them mentioned something about the bank. Her stomach tightened. She had heard rumors before, but hearing it so close made her heart race. She knew the town had little protection, and that any trouble could quickly become dangerous. Without thinking twice, Leela grabbed her coat and stepped outside. The warm wind carried the scent of dust and dry earth. She moved quickly, her eyes scanning the streets for a familiar face. Her heart pounded as she thought of the town's safety. The children were playing freely, unaware of the danger looming nearby. The adults were busy with their work, blind to the tension that was about to strike. Lila knew she couldn't face this alone. She needed someone strong, someone fast, someone who could act when fear froze everyone else. Her mind immediately went to Jack Ryder. Jack was a cowboy who lived on the outskirts of town. He didn't talk much, but he had a reputation that spread far beyond the dusty streets of their small town. He was known for his quick reflexes and calm nature. When trouble appeared, he didn't panic or hesitate. People trusted him because he had saved them before, and everyone knew he wouldn't let danger harm them if he could help it. Lila's pace quickened as she ran down the wooden sidewalk toward Jack's small cabin on the edge of town. Her boots kicked up clouds of dust with every step. "Please be quick," she shouted as she reached the cabin, her voice urgent and filled with fear. The words echoed across the quiet street, catching the attention of a few passers-by. Some stopped in their tracks, turning their heads toward the sound. The whole town seemed to pause, sensing that something serious was happening. Jack was already outside, tending to his horse. He turned at the sound of Lila's voice. His dark eyes met hers, and without a word, he understood. There was no need for explanation. Jack moved with practiced speed, swinging into the saddle. His movements were precise and confident, a silent promise that he would handle whatever danger was coming. Lila watched as he adjusted the reins and nudged his horse forward. Every step he took was calculated, steady, and purposeful. She felt a mix of fear and relief, knowing that the town's hope rested in his hands. As Jack rode through the streets, townsfolk stopped what they were doing. Shopkeepers froze in mid-motion. Children stopped their games, and even the sheriff, leaning against the post outside the saloon, straightened his posture. Everyone sensed that something unusual was happening, something that required courage and attention. The town held its breath, watching the cowboy who was now their shield and protector. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of hay, wood, and dust. Jack's horse moved smoothly across the streets, hooves clattering against the wooden planks. People whispered among themselves, guessing what danger could be approaching. Some thought it might be wild animals. Others feared a fire. But the tension in Lila's eyes made it clear that the threat was more serious. The uncertainty added to the suspense, and for the first time that day, the town felt a wave of collective fear. Lila followed Jack at a safe distance, glancing over her shoulder to make sure the children and townsfolk were out of harm's way. She knew that if trouble came, There would be little time to react. Every second mattered, and she prayed silently that Jack's quickness would be enough. The streets felt unusually empty now, as if the town itself sensed the danger approaching. Windows opened, and heads peeked out. Curious, but cautious. Even the dogs in the yards were alert, ears pricked and growling softly. Jack stopped briefly at the bank, a small stone building with a wooden door that looked ordinary to anyone unaware of the brewing danger. He scanned the area with sharp eyes, noting every detail: the barrels stacked against the walls, the carts parked nearby, and the narrow alley that could serve as an escape route. Every instinct he had honed over years of riding and working the land told him that this situation demanded vigilance. He didn't rush, but every muscle in his body was ready for sudden action. Meanwhile, Lila stayed a few steps behind him, her heart pounding. She felt helpless, unable to fight but unwilling to leave her town unprotected. She glanced around and saw the faces of the townsfolk in the windows, some filled with worry, others with admiration. Everyone was frozen in a moment of suspense, united by fear and hope. Lila realized that the strength of the town was not just in Jack's hands, but in the collective courage and attention of everyone who cared for their home. Minutes passed like hours. The sound of the wind, the shifting of dust, and the occasional call of a bird were the only noises in the tense silence. Jack's presence brought a strange sense of calm amidst the fear. People trusted him instinctively, knowing that he had faced danger before and survived. He was a silent hero, someone who acted not for fame or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Lila admired him quietly, her fear now mixed with awe. Suddenly, movement in the distance caught Jack's attention. Shadows emerged near the edge of town, figures moving quickly and deliberately. He tightened his grip on the reins, eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. Lila gasped softly, realizing that the rumors were true. The town was indeed facing a real threat. Her earlier fear returned with a sharper edge, but seeing Jack ready to act gave her hope. The townsfolk, who had been frozen in place, now watched more intently, sensing that the moment of truth had arrived. Jack's horse shifted slightly, ready to spring into action at any sign of danger. Lila's eyes never left the approaching figures. The wind seemed to carry the tension across the streets, touching every person who waited silently behind closed doors and curtained windows. The town had stopped its ordinary life, held in a moment of suspense by the courage and quickness of a single cowboy. "Please be quick," Lila whispered again, almost to herself. But Jack heard it. His lips tightened in acknowledgement. He didn't need words. His next actions would speak louder than anything else. With a final glance at the townsfolk, Jack prepared himself for whatever was coming. The shadows grew larger, and the moment of confrontation approached. The calm of the town had vanished, replaced by anticipation and the silent hope that one person could make a difference. The sun continued its slow descent, casting long shadows that mingled with the growing tension. Children peeked from behind doors. Shopkeepers leaned cautiously out of windows. And even the horses seemed aware that something unusual was happening. The entire town was frozen in time, waiting for the first sign of movement. In that stillness, courage, fear, and hope intertwined, creating a moment that would be remembered long after the day ended. Jack tightened his reins, feeling the rhythm of his horse beneath him. He could sense the danger, but he also knew that hesitation could cost lives. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but he stayed calm, calculating his first move carefully. Lila's presence behind him reminded him that this was not just about skill or courage, it was about protecting people who trusted him. The town, the children, the elderly. Everyone depended on him in that frozen moment. As the first figures of the approaching threat became clearer, the air seemed to grow heavier. Dust swirled in the sunlight, making the shapes of the approaching men appear larger, almost shadow-like. Lila's grip on her coat tightened, her mind racing with what could happen. The streets that had once been filled with laughter and chatter were now empty, silent, except for the sound of hooves and the soft creak of wooden signs swaying in the wind. Jack's eyes never wavered. He was ready. The town watched silently, hearts beating in unison with the rhythm of his horse's hooves. The moment of truth was near, and in that moment, the entire town, young and old, knew that everything depended on one man's courage and speed, the cowboy who had moved fast when the town needed him most. The shadows of the approaching figures stretched long across the dusty streets as Jack guided his horse slowly, carefully, toward the edge of the town. He kept his eyes sharp, scanning every movement, every flicker of motion, ready to react at the first sign of trouble. His horse's hooves made a steady rhythm on the wooden sidewalks, and each sound seemed to echo louder than usual in the quiet, tense air. The town felt suspended in time, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. Lila Hart stayed close behind Jack, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She had never felt fear like this before. Yet at the same time, she felt a strange sense of hope. She trusted Jack completely, not just because of his skills, but because she had seen his bravery in action before. In her mind, she replayed all the times he had quietly helped others, handled danger, and never failed to protect those who could not defend themselves. But this was different this time. The stakes felt higher. The townsfolk, sensing the tension, began to notice Jack's movements. Shopkeepers paused mid-task, closing their shutters quietly. Children clutched the hands of their parents and peered from behind corners, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. The sheriff leaned against the saloon door, arms crossed, watching intently. Even the wind seemed to whisper through the empty streets, carrying the dust and anticipation with it. No one spoke. No one moved. The town had frozen, waiting for the cowboy to act. Jack slowed his horse near the bank, a small stone building with a wooden door and barred windows. He studied every detail carefully. The approaching men were now more visible, their shadows growing longer as the sun dipped lower. Jack could see their faces partially, but not clearly enough to know how many there were, or what they might do first. His mind worked quickly, calculating the best way to protect the town without putting anyone in harm's way. Every instinct he had gained from years of riding, working cattle, and facing danger told him to remain calm, observe, and act only when necessary. Lila felt the tension like a weight pressing down on her. She wanted to run, to warn everyone to hide, but she knew that would only cause panic. She stayed behind Jack, hoping that her presence might give him strength, even though she couldn't fight the danger herself. She watched as he adjusted the reins, his movements deliberate, precise, and calm. It was as if time had slowed down, and the entire town could feel it. Every person, every animal, every flicker of dust seemed to be waiting for the first move. Jack's eyes never left the approaching group. He could see that they were moving with purpose, confident that the town would not be ready for them. But they did not yet understand Jack's skill, his quick thinking, or the courage that had earned him respect across the region. He had faced situations far more dangerous than this before, and although he did not underestimate the threat, he knew that fear would not help. Only focus, speed, and smart decisions could protect the town. The first figure stepped closer to the bank, moving cautiously, yet with the boldness of someone who believed they had the upper hand. Jack nudged his horse slightly, adjusting his position for better advantage. He was not moving recklessly. Every step was measured, every motion calculated. Lila watched with a mixture of fear and admiration, noting how Jack's calmness contrasted sharply with the tension in the town. Even in the face of danger, he seemed to exude confidence, a silent message to everyone that they were not alone. People in town continued to watch from hidden corners and behind closed doors. Some whispered prayers under their breath. Others clutched lucky charms or crossed their fingers. Children, wide-eyed, could not fully understand the gravity of the moment, but they felt the tension and knew something important was happening. Even the sheriff remained silent, trusting Jack to handle the situation. It was a rare moment when the town collectively relied on one person's skill and courage. Jack's mind raced as he assessed the approaching group. He counted the shadows, noted their movements, and identified potential risks. He considered every possible outcome and prepared himself for sudden action. His horse shifted under him, sensing his tension, but remained steady and responsive. Jack knew that speed was important, but so was precision. A single wrong move could endanger not only himself but the entire town. Lila, standing behind him, whispered a quiet encouragement. "Be careful," she said, though she knew Jack could not hear her. Her words were more for herself than for him, a way to steady her own nerves. She watched as he positioned himself near a barrel and a wooden post, subtly using the environment for cover. Jack's awareness of his surroundings was almost instinctive. He seemed to move in harmony with the town itself, anticipating where danger could strike and how to respond. The approaching figures were now clearly visible, moving with quiet confidence. They expected to intimidate the town, to act quickly and gain control before anyone could respond. But Jack's presence disrupted their plans. They hesitated slightly, noticing the cowboy ready and focused. Even the boldest among them could sense that Jack was no ordinary opponent. His calm demeanor and careful positioning suggested that he was prepared for anything they could throw at him. Lila's heart pounded faster. She had never seen anyone command attention and respect in such a quiet, powerful way. Jack did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply moved with authority and focus. The townsfolk, sensing his determination, felt a surge of hope. The fear that had frozen them moments before was slowly being replaced by quiet confidence. They knew that Jack would not fail, if given a chance. Jack continued to observe the group, noting small details that others might miss. One of the men carried a bag that jingled with coins. Another held a length of rope, and a third kept looking around nervously. Jack's eyes flicked from one to another, calculating how to neutralize the threat while minimizing risk. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, but he did not falter. Every motion of his horse, every adjustment of his stance, was part of a carefully planned response. The sun continued to sink, casting long shadows that made the approaching group look larger and more intimidating. Dust swirled in the wind, creating a hazy curtain that added to the tension. Lila clutched her coat tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. She could feel the energy of the town, the collective hope and fear mingling in the air. Every person waiting silently behind doors or curtains understood that the moment of action was near. Suddenly, one of the men made a move toward the bank door. Jack's eyes narrowed. He nudged his horse slightly, shifting his weight to prepare for a sudden reaction. Time seemed to slow, the sounds of the town fading into the background. Only the approaching figures and Jack's readiness mattered. The entire town seemed frozen in that instant, held in suspense by the cowboy's skill and calmness. Jack's horse shifted under him, sensing the change in tension. Jack took a deep breath. Focusing on the task at hand, he did not act hastily. He waited for the right moment, knowing that patience and precision were more important than speed alone. Lila's eyes followed every movement, her fear mingling with awe. She had never seen such controlled courage. The kind that did not rely on noise or threats, but on intelligence and careful preparation. The man near the bank door hesitated, noticing Jack's readiness. His confidence wavered slightly, and he glanced toward the others. Jack's presence had already disrupted their plan. The rest of the group slowed, unsure of how to proceed. Jack's calmness was more powerful than any weapon they could see that he was prepared for anything. Lila felt a sense of relief, knowing that Jack's presence alone was enough to give the town a fighting chance. Jack continued to observe, shifting his position subtly, using barrels and posts for cover while keeping his eyes on every movement. He calculated the distance, timing, and possible outcomes with the precision of someone who had faced countless challenges before. Every instinct, every skill he had developed over years of work and life on the frontier, came into play. Lila watched silently, feeling the weight of the moment but trusting completely in the cowboy who had always been their protector. The townsfolk remained frozen, caught between fear and hope. Some peeked from behind doors, some pressed their faces against window panes, but all of them watched, understanding that the next moments would decide the town's fate. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, carrying the scent of dust and hay as if nature itself awaited Jack's first move. Jack's eyes never wavered. He was ready. Every sense, every muscle, Every instinct was focused on protecting the town. He did not rush. He waited for the perfect moment to act, knowing that haste could cost lives. Lila's presence behind him reminded him why he was there, to protect not just buildings or money, but people who trusted him completely. The approaching men finally made a small step forward, and Jack shifted his horse slightly, ready to act. Dust rose around them, the sunlight casting dramatic shadows across the street. Every person in town seemed to hold their breath, frozen in anticipation. Jack's calmness contrasted sharply with the growing tension. A silent promise that the town would not face this threat alone. And in that moment, the entire town understood that courage could come in quiet forms, in measured actions, and in someone willing to face danger with clarity and skill. Jack's presence had turned fear into hope, and the stage was set for what was about to happen next. The tension hung thick in the air, every second feeling like an hour, as the cowboy prepared for the moment when action would be necessary. The tension in the town was almost unbearable. Every wooden board, every window, and every shadow seemed to hold its breath. Jack Ryder's eyes never left the approaching figures. He knew that this moment would test not only his skill but his patience and judgment. He had faced danger before, but there was something about this quiet, dusty town, with all its innocent people depending on him, that made every heartbeat feel heavier. The men approaching the bank moved with quiet confidence. They thought they were in control, unaware that Jack had already anticipated their actions. Jack shifted slightly in his saddle, subtly adjusting his position behind the wooden barrels that offered some cover. His horse shifted too, sensing the tension in the air, and the rhythm of its hooves became steadier, more deliberate. Jack's calmness contrasted sharply with the fear that gripped the townsfolk, and even the approaching men seemed to notice his quiet authority. Lila Hart stayed close, keeping just enough distance to remain safe but close enough to see what was happening. Her heart pounded. She could feel the town's fear, the collective worry of people who had stopped their daily lives and watched the streets freeze in suspense. She saw the children pressed against doors, the shopkeepers peeking out from windows, and the sheriff leaning tensely against the saloon post. They were all frozen, waiting for what they knew would be a test of courage. Jack's eyes flicked between the approaching men, noting their movements and body language. One man had a bag that jingled with coins, another kept glancing around nervously, and a third seemed more cautious, almost hesitant. Jack's instincts told him to wait, to watch carefully, and to act only when the perfect moment came. He had learned over the years that courage was not in rushing forward recklessly but in controlled, precise action. The first figure made a small move toward the bank door. Jack noticed it instantly. His hand tightened lightly on the reins, his body shifting subtly as he prepared. The dust around their boots swirled in the warm sunlight, making the approaching men look larger and more threatening. Lila's breath caught, and she whispered a quiet prayer under her breath. She knew the town depended on Jack, just as she depended on him. But fear was still there. It had to be. To make the moment feel real, Jack's horse responded instantly to the slightest movement, ready to spring into action at any signal. Jack's mind worked quickly, calculating the distance, timing, and possible outcomes of every action he might take. His calmness never wavered, though, and that steadiness radiated outward, touching even Lila, in a way that made her feel a little braver. She could see that Jack was not just waiting for a moment to act but was prepared for everything that might happen in those critical seconds. The townsfolk, watching silently, began to sense that the approaching men were hesitant now. Jack's quiet confidence had created a subtle but powerful effect. The first man glanced at his companions, confusion flickering across his face. He had expected easy control over the town, a quick grab of the coins and a smooth escape. But now, there was a cowboy, calm and ready, blocking the way. That hesitation was exactly what Jack needed. Jack nudged his horse slightly, moving just enough to shift his position behind the barrels. He did not reveal his plan, but his posture and focus signaled readiness. Lila could see the intensity in his eyes. He was ready to act at the perfect moment, using skill rather than force to protect the town. The quiet streets of the town seemed even quieter now. the townsfolk holding their breath as Jack waited for the right time. One of the approaching men stepped closer to the bank door again. Jack tilted slightly, using the wooden post as cover while keeping a clear view. He noted the angle, the distance, and the movements of each man. He could sense the tension in the air, and knew that any wrong move by the men could give him the advantage he needed. His years of experience, his knowledge of quick action, and his understanding of human behavior gave him an edge in this standoff. Lila watched every movement with a mix of fear and awe. She could see the men growing uncertain, their confidence wavering in the presence of Jack's calm determination. She could also see the subtle ways in which Jack used his environment, barrels, posts, and shadows to create cover and leverage. It was like watching a chess game unfold in real life, with every move carefully calculated. Jack's horse shifted again, responding to his gentle command. He adjusted his posture, leaning slightly forward, ready to act. The first man near the bank door froze for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. His hesitation gave Jack the chance he needed. With a smooth motion, Jack signaled his horse and made his move, cutting off any potential approach to the bank. The man's eyes widened, and a small gasp escaped him. The other men glanced at their companion, confusion spreading among them. Lila could barely contain her relief. She realized that Jack's quick thinking had already changed the balance of power. The tension in the streets was palpable, and the town remained frozen in suspense, witnessing the quiet heroism of a man who moved with precision and care. She thought of how quickly a town could descend into chaos, and how one person's courage could make all the difference. The men adjusted slightly, trying to find another way in, but Jack anticipated their movements. He shifted subtly, moving his horse and body in a way that made any direct approach difficult. His presence was a shield, both physical and psychological. Lila watched, heart pounding, as Jack maintained control without a word, without raising a voice, and without causing panic. It was remarkable, almost magical, how one person's quiet authority could calm the fear of many and unsettle the confidence of those with ill intentions. The group of men started whispering among themselves, their initial confidence slipping. They did not understand the town, and they certainly did not understand Jack. He had studied their every movement and was ready to counter anything they might attempt. Lila's chest tightened as she realized how close the town had come to danger. But she also felt pride and gratitude for Jack's skill. Suddenly, the man carrying the jingling bag made a small, impatient move, as if he could no longer wait. Jack shifted his weight slightly, nudged his horse just enough, and blocked the path with a calm but deliberate action. The man stopped immediately, startled by Jack's quick response. The other men froze too, uncertainty spreading through their ranks. For the first time, they realized that this town was not as easy a target as they had believed. Lila's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, and she silently encouraged Jack, though she knew he did not need it. Every second was critical, and Jack's calmness had created an invisible barrier of courage around the town. The streets remained eerily quiet, the townsfolk frozen in anticipation. Watching this delicate standoff unfold, Jack continued to observe carefully, making tiny adjustments in his position to maintain control of the situation. He noted the approach, the hesitation, and the slight missteps of the men. Each action he took was deliberate, designed to protect the town and prevent any sudden chaos. Lila could see the precision in his movements, the quiet confidence in his eyes, and the skill in his body language. She felt a wave of hope wash over her. The men whispered again, trying to figure out how to proceed, but their fear of Jack's readiness kept them from moving recklessly. The town seemed to breathe as one, holding on to the hope that Jack would handle the situation. Children pressed closer to windows, shopkeepers peeked out cautiously, and even the sheriff remained tense but trusting. Every soul in the town understood that their safety depended on the courage and skill of this lone cowboy. Jack shifted slightly, adjusting the angle to maintain his advantage. The man with the jingling bag moved again, this time more slowly, testing Jack's reaction. Jack did not hesitate. With a smooth motion, he nudged his horse forward, signaling a shift that blocked the path completely. The man froze in surprise, and the other men glanced at each other nervously. Lila felt her chest tighten. The tension was almost unbearable. Yet she could see that Jack had the situation under control. Time seemed to stretch as Jack continued his subtle maneuvers. He did not need to fight yet. He only needed to maintain control and readiness. The men's uncertainty grew, and their earlier confidence evaporated. Lila watched as hope replaced fear in her chest, knowing that Jack's calm skill had changed the entire dynamic. The town remained frozen in suspense, but now it was a suspense filled with cautious optimism. Jack's eyes scanned the group one final time, noting their hesitation and nervous glances. He felt the rhythm of his horse beneath him, and the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He knew that any sudden movement could trigger action, and he was ready. Lila, standing just behind him, could feel his focus radiating outward, calming even her own racing heart. The town watched, frozen yet hopeful. Jack's quiet authority had turned what could have been a moment of fear into a carefully controlled standoff. The approaching men, once confident and bold, were now uncertain, held in place by the skill, intelligence, and courage of one man. Lila realized that this was more than bravery, it was wisdom, quick thinking, and the ability to act with precision under pressure. As the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped lower, the moment remained suspended in time. Every person in the town felt the tension, the anticipation, and the hope that Jack would prevail. And in that quiet, tense street, it became clear that courage, skill, and calm determination could protect more than just lives. It could protect the spirit of a whole town. The sun dipped low over the horizon, turning the dusty streets of the town into shades of gold and amber. The tension that had held the town in suspense all afternoon began to shift, replaced by a careful stillness. Jack Ryder's eyes never left the approaching men, but he could sense the moment had arrived when action was unavoidable. Every second mattered, and he knew that one decisive move could save the town from chaos. Lila Hart stood behind him, her hands gripping the edge of her coat. Her heart pounding, she could feel the weight of the entire town resting on this quiet, determined cowboy. The men hesitated again, realizing that Jack was not just ready but far more prepared than they had expected. Their confidence, which had carried them into town, began to falter. They whispered nervously among themselves, casting uncertain glances at each other. The first man stepped forward slightly, testing the waters, but Jack shifted his horse just enough to block any direct approach. His calm authority was unyielding, a silent warning that the town would not be an easy target. Lila's chest tightened as she watched, knowing that this was the critical moment. Jack's focus was absolute. He studied each man carefully, noting their movements, their intentions, and even the smallest gestures of hesitation. Years of experience had trained him to anticipate danger, and now that skill was the town's shield. The men seemed to sense his readiness, their confidence wavering further. The town, meanwhile, remained frozen in a mix of fear and hope, watching every subtle shift of Jack's body and horse. Children pressed closer to windows, shopkeepers leaned out cautiously, and the sheriff stood silently, trusting the cowboy completely. Then it happened. The man with the jingling bag, frustrated by the delay, made a sudden move toward the bank. Jack reacted instantly. With a smooth motion, he nudged his horse forward, subtly but effectively blocking the path. The man froze, surprised by Jack's speed and precision. The other men glanced at him nervously, uncertainty spreading among them. Lila's heart leapt. The balance of power had shifted, and the threat was beginning to crumble under the weight of one man's courage. Jack did not stop. He continued to move strategically, using barrels, posts, and the natural layout of the street to maintain control. Every motion was calculated, designed to protect the town while preventing chaos. The approaching men, once confident and bold, were now unsure, hesitant, and increasingly fearful. Lila watched, amazed at the quiet power of his actions. The streets that had moments ago been tense with fear now seemed alive with anticipation, the kind that comes just before a storm breaks or just before it passes safely. The town began to breathe a little easier, sensing the shift. The children peeked from behind doors, their curiosity mixing with relief. Shopkeepers and townsfolk exchanged cautious glances, realizing that Jack was turning the tide. Even the sheriff straightened, nodding slightly in silent acknowledgement of the cowboy's skill. The fear that had frozen the town was gradually replaced by hope and admiration. One man's courage and quick thinking had become the town's safeguard. Jack's eyes never left the approaching men. He noticed the small signs of doubt in their expressions, the hesitation of a step, the flicker of uncertainty, the whispered words to each other. He adjusted his position slightly, always maintaining readiness, always prepared for any sudden movement. Lila's heart pounded as she realized the incredible patience and focus required to maintain such control. She admired not just his courage but his intelligence, the way he combined skill with calm judgment. The man with the bag tried again, taking a careful step forward, but Jack anticipated it. With a subtle shift of his horse and a slight movement of his body, he blocked the path again, unspoken yet unmistakable in its authority. The man froze, exchanging a nervous glance with his companions. Lila could feel the tension slowly breaking. The men were losing confidence, and the town could sense it. Fear was no longer the only emotion. Hope had begun to grow. Jack's careful strategy continued, his actions quiet but decisive. He didn't need to shout or threaten. His calm presence and precise movements were enough to control the situation. Lila watched every moment, feeling a mix of relief and admiration. The tension in the streets was still strong, but it was now balanced by the growing belief that the town would be safe. Every step Jack took was like a carefully placed piece in a puzzle, and slowly, the pieces were coming together. The men began to retreat slightly, their earlier boldness replaced by uncertainty and fear. Jack noticed the change immediately. He kept his eyes on them, maintaining the pressure without unnecessary aggression. His horse shifted slightly, keeping the men in view and preventing any sudden attempt to approach the bank. Lila's heart raced, but she could see that Jack's presence was having its full effect. The town, once frozen in fear, began to sense that this moment of danger was nearly over. One of the men whispered urgently to another, clearly realizing that the situation was no longer in their favor. Jack's keen eyes caught every wordless sign, every subtle movement. He adjusted slightly again, maintaining control while leaving an opening for the men to retreat without chaos. Lila felt a wave of relief wash over her as she saw the first man take a hesitant step backward. The tide had turned, and the danger was receding. The townspeople began to exhale collectively, the tension easing slowly. Children relaxed slightly. Shopkeepers leaned back from windows, and even the sheriff allowed himself a quiet sigh. Jack's presence had transformed fear into confidence, uncertainty into hope. He had turned what could have been a disastrous confrontation into a controlled standoff, demonstrating that courage, skill, and calmness could protect more than just lives. They could preserve peace and order. The remaining men, now fully aware that they could not succeed, began to retreat quietly. Their steps were careful, cautious, as if even a wrong movement could provoke Jack's swift response. Lila felt a mixture of pride and relief. The town had witnessed something remarkable. A single person's intelligence, patience, and courage had prevented chaos without unnecessary force. The streets, once tense and silent, began to feel alive again. But this time, with gratitude and admiration. Jack watched them go, his posture calm but alert. He did not relax immediately, knowing that the threat was only fully gone once the men were clear of the town. His eyes followed their retreating figures until they disappeared over the horizon. Only then did he allow himself to take a small breath of relief. Lila approached him slowly, her eyes wide with gratitude and awe. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved the town." Jack nodded quietly, his face calm but thoughtful. "We all did," he said softly, including the townspeople who had held their positions, watched closely, and trusted him to act. Lila smiled faintly, understanding that his humility was part of what made him a true hero. He did not seek recognition, only the satisfaction of knowing that the town was safe. The townsfolk began to emerge from their hiding spots, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Children ran into the streets, laughter slowly returning as the sense of danger lifted. Shopkeepers reopened their doors, and neighbors exchanged relieved smiles. The town had held together, thanks to the bravery and quick thinking of one man, but also thanks to the collective hope and trust that had filled the streets. Lila stepped closer to Jack, her hands brushing lightly against his arm. "We were all so scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Jack gave her a small, reassuring nod. "You stayed calm," he said. "You warned the town. You helped. Courage isn't just one person, it's everyone doing their part." Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest. She realized that even in the darkest moments, people working together could face danger and emerge stronger. The sheriff walked over, tipping his hat to Jack. "You've done good, son," he said quietly. "The town owes you more than words can say." Jack nodded politely, his focus never leaving the townsfolk. He didn't need praise. He had done what he came to do: protect the town, safeguard the people, and restore peace. Lila watched the exchange, feeling immense gratitude for his quiet heroism. As the sun set completely, casting long shadows over the now calm town, life began to return to normal. Horses were led back to their stables, windows were closed slowly, and families gathered once more in their homes. But something had changed. The town would always remember this day, the day when fear gripped their streets, and courage, patience, and quick thinking preserved their safety. Lila and Jack stood together for a moment, watching the quiet streets. The town was calm, but the story of bravery would live on in their hearts. Lila took a deep breath, letting the tension leave her body. She looked at Jack and smiled faintly. "You were amazing," she said. Jack simply nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We were lucky," he said, "that the town stayed calm. That made all the difference." Lila knew he was right. Courage was not just his alone. It was shared by everyone who had watched, waited, and trusted him to act. The town slowly settled into the evening. Lamps were lit, doors were secured, and the townsfolk began to share the story quietly among themselves. Every conversation carried whispers of awe and gratitude. The children, too young to understand the full gravity of the situation, had seen a living example of courage and quick thinking. The adults, wiser and more aware, would carry the story as a reminder that fear could be faced and overcome, especially when one person was willing to act with clarity and bravery. Jack mounted his horse once more, this time not in preparation for danger, but to return to the quiet of the outskirts. Lila walked beside him for a few steps, feeling both relief and respect. "You made a difference," she said softly. Jack looked at the town one last time, its people slowly returning to life, and nodded. "We all did," he repeated, echoing his earlier words. The lesson was clear. Courage, wisdom, and trust could protect more than just a town. They could protect hope itself. As night fell, stars appeared in the clear sky, twinkling above the quiet town. The streets, once filled with fear and anticipation, were now peaceful. Lila and Jack shared a final glance before parting ways, both understanding that life would return to normal, but the memory of this day would stay forever. The town had been tested, and it had survived. The people had witnessed heroism in its truest form, and they would never forget the day when one cowboy's courage saved them all.